Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Brothers and sisters in Christ, no truer words have ever been spoken. Today we celebrate the great feast of Christ the King, when we honor the kingship of Jesus Christ, his sovereignty, and the truth that he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the Lord of heaven and earth, King of kings. 600 years before the birth of Jesus, the prophet Daniel from our first reading today gets a glimpse of this great king who comes down on the clouds of heaven, receiving dominion and glory, a king for all peoples and all nations, all languages, an everlasting king whose kingship shall never be taken away or destroyed. What a dream the prophet Daniel had, considering his circumstances. Just a handful of years earlier, the prophet Isaiah, in dramatic fashion, marched into the throne room of the chosen people's final king, King Zedekiah, and in the name of God spoke to the weak and faithless king, telling him to humble himself and surrender to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, who at the time had Jerusalem completely surrounded on all sides. If he did this, if he would surrender, God would spare their nation. However, King Zedekiah had long ago stopped listening to the voice of truth and instead decided to listen to the voice of his own ego and his own pride. And after 30 months of famine and being surrounded in some of the worst suffering that the Jewish people had ever seen, Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to the city and mercilessly and ruthlessly killed almost everyone inside, including the young sons of King Zedekiah. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. The chosen people and their faithless king paid the ultimate price for not listening to God's voice. And our prophet Daniel from the first reading today watched it all happen. In fact, he was one of the very few that were spared by the treacherous Nebuchadnezzar. He, along with the prophet Isaiah, had to watch as their city, including God's great temple, forged by the blood, sweat, and tears of their ancestors, burned to the ground as a testament to their disobedience and their disloyalty, as a testament to the sin and the betrayal of the chosen people who had forgotten God, their one true king, and who had long ago stopped listening to his voice. And make no mistake, the city didn't fall because God made it fall. It didn't fall because God was angry with the chosen people. It fell because the people and their king had turned their backs on God, who had faithfully and lovingly provided for them and had always sustained them through their hardships and their difficulties and their oppression. Many people have a false image in their mind of the God of the Old Testament, thinking he's very vengeful and angry. That's not the case. The God of the Old Testament is the same God that we gather here to worship today. If you go back and you read through the history of our ancestors in faith in the Old Testament, you'll notice a very simple truth that has never stopped being true and is just as true today. When God's people turn their eyes and their hearts toward God, when they offer him their love and their praise and their faith, their trust, when they invite him into their midst and they seek his will, life is good. It's not always easy, but it's good. Even in the midst of great trials and struggles, when the people are with God, they are triumphant. When they turn away from him, they fall and they suffer. They lose hope. And this very same principle applies to each and every one of us here today, because our God is still the same. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Our prophet Daniel from our first reading today was one of the few that turned away from the crowd. He loved God. He was faithful to God. And he continued to serve God for the rest of his days. And even though he endured great hardship and suffering, God spared him and led him through all of it. When he was tempted to abandon his faith, or even had his life threatened if he refused to renounce it, he stood with a voice of truth. He stood with his one true king. And in the midst of his trials, in the midst of the despair of watching his people ruthlessly killed, as he stood and watched the kingdom God and his ancestor had forged burn to the ground, his nation destroyed and the temple desecrated, as he endured that pain and anguish, he did so resting on his one true love, his one true king. And he stood by the King of Heaven faithfully each day of his life. When he was told not to pray, he refused and was thrown to the lions. And instead of destroying him, those lions that surrounded him bowed down to the one true king that stood by his side in the midst of it all. The king whose voice Daniel continued to listen to. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Brothers and sisters in Christ, as we gather together today, let us remember to live our lives each day like our ancestor Daniel, always listening to the voice of our one true King. Even when the world around us is crumbling, when the walls of our city are surrounded by our enemies yelling loudly and desiring our destruction, when it seems as though everything we hold near and dear is burning and our lives are thrown into chaos, and we're surrounded by lions and are being pulled in 1,000 different directions, even then, let us close our eyes and let us dream Daniel's dream, opening wide our arms and our hearts to the one like a Son of Man, coming on the clouds of heaven, receiving dominion, glory, and kingship, the one that all peoples, nations, and languages will one day serve. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not be taken away. His kingship shall not be destroyed. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice.